What if everything we know about human evolution is wrong? What if we were not created through chance but by design? Tonight, we'll journey through the ashes of something long buried beneath our DNA, an ancient memory, a forgotten voice, a signal that's been calling us back, not to a place, but to a purpose. From a skeleton found deep beneath the Icelandic ice, to a worldwide awakening that threatens to rewrite who we are and why we exist. The truth is no longer waiting in the stars, it's waking up inside us. But the question remains: do we really want to remember who we used to be? They told him it was routine, a minor seismic event, a small tremor in the icy north where such things were not uncommon. But Elvar Jonsson had long learned that nothing in this part of the earth was ever routine. Iceland's land was young, still growing, still tearing itself open with heat from below. But this was something else. The tremor hadn't started deep in the earth. It had come from beneath the glacier, from something trapped under it, as if the earth was trying to push it back out. Elvar arrived at the site by helicopter. Snow blew sideways in violent gusts, blinding the descent, but the coordinates were precise. The moment he stepped off the chopper, the air felt thick, not cold, but oppressive, like walking into a cathedral built by something not meant to worship. A team of geologists stood motionless by a fresh rupture in the ice wall, their faces pale, their voices low. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. Something had been unearthed that should have stayed buried. The crack yawned like a throat, leading downward into a tunnel that shimmered with unnatural smoothness. Elvar descended slowly, each step into the crevasse feeling like he was sinking into a different time. His flashlight flickered despite a fresh battery. The deeper he went, the more sound seemed to vanish. No wind, no breath, just a low vibration in his ears that wasn't physical, but mental. It was a sound only the bones remembered. Then he saw it, not just a skeleton, but a message written in bone. Lying in perfect stillness beneath a translucent sheet of ancient ice was a humanoid figure, curled as if in sleep. But the proportions were off. The rib cage was too smooth, the skull too elongated, and the limbs too exact, as though sculpted by intelligence far beyond natural selection. Etched directly into the skull was a spiral tree, its roots twisting downward like veins, branching into star-like nodes. It pulsed faintly under his light, not with reflection, but with its own inner glow, like bioluminescence trapped in stone. Elvar froze. His breath caught, his hands trembling, not from cold but from recognition. This was not just old. It was impossibly old and impossibly human. He raised a scanner. The carbon dating failed. The machine blinked, data invalid. Organic material beyond scale. And then the lights died. In the darkness, he felt a heat at the base of his skull, not painful, but warm, rising like smoke. Then came the sound, not with his ears, but inside his mind. A voice, not speaking but thinking, pressing into his consciousness with a question he didn't understand at first. Do you remember where you came from? He staggered backward, heart hammering. The voice wasn't his. The words had no sound, but left meaning behind, like the echo of a dream. His flashlight blinked once, twice, then flared back on, and in that flash, for just a second, the cave changed. He wasn't in ice anymore. He stood barefoot in black sand, under skies that churned with auroras like veins of a dying god. Tall figures moved in the distance, shadows made of light, faceless, watching. In the center of them, a glowing tree rose from the earth, its roots coiling into the void like tendrils of memory. And in that moment, Elvar understood, this wasn't the first time he had been here. He collapsed. When he woke, the team was around him, confused, concerned. "You passed out," someone said. But Elvar wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the skull in the ice. Not because it was alien, but because in its structure, in its bone, in that spiral sigil carved into it, he recognized something terrifying. It looked like him. Elvar didn't speak for 3 hours after the incident. He sat in the corner of the mobile lab, eyes fixed on the scan of the skeleton, fingers twitching involuntarily as his mind tried to process the impossible. Around him, the research team whispered and moved cautiously, as if afraid that whatever had touched him might be contagious. The skeleton had been carefully extracted from the ice using low-heat lasers, suspended now in a cryoglass chamber glowing softly, like it had a heartbeat of its own. He finally broke the silence. "Run a full structure scan. Density, geometry, mineral content. Everything. Triple layer analysis." His voice was flat, almost disconnected. But beneath it, there was something else: urgency, maybe even fear. The kind of fear scientists never admit to, the kind that tells you what you found shouldn't exist. Not just because it's strange, but because it makes everything you thought was true completely obsolete. As data came in, the team fell into stunned silence again. The bones were too dense, calcium intertwined with crystalline carbon chains not found in any biological record. The marrow had traces of iridium and xenon isotopes, elements associated not with biology, but asteroid cores. And the structure. The skull's cranial capacity surpassed that of modern humans by 30%. But it wasn't the size that disturbed Elvar, it was the design. There were no signs of damage, aging, or mutation. It was perfect. Too perfect. He zoomed in on the spiral tree symbol carved into the frontal bone. It wasn't decoration. It was a precise microscopic relief, etched with heat beyond any tool currently known. Inside the symbol were grooves each no wider than a human hair arranged in binary pattern. Not just a mark. A message. A message left not on paper, not on stone, but in the bone of a being that had no reason to carry it unless it was made to. And then, the lights dimmed. A pulse swept through the lab, just one, low and slow, like a tremor made of static. The skeleton inside the chamber shifted only slightly, but enough. Enough for everyone in the room to freeze. Instruments sparked. The air grew heavy again. Then came a sound, not mechanical, not biological, but something in between. A low resonance, like a voice trying to speak through vibrating metal. Elvar stepped forward. Something in him, something he didn't understand, told him to listen. He placed his palm on the glass chamber. The pulse returned. And in that moment, he saw again the field of black sand, the sky of shifting colors, the towering beings of light, but this time, he saw himself standing among them, not as an outsider, but as a part of them, with eyes that glowed and skin that shimmered like ash and fire. He snapped back. The lab returned. But he was no longer the same. The team tried to speak to him, but their voices were distant, like echoes across water. He walked slowly to the computer and replayed the pulse waveform. Then he ran it through translation software, frequency matchers, even AI language predictors. Nothing worked. Nothing made sense. Until he reversed the pattern. Played it backward. And what came through was a fragment of a voice, soft, crackled, but human. It said only 2 words, "Find Eden." Elvar stared at the monitor. His pulse was racing. Not because he feared the skeleton now, but because deep inside, somewhere beyond logic, he realized something unthinkable. This bone wasn't dead. It was waiting. For the next 24 hours, Elvar didn't sleep. He paced between terminals, adjusted readings, recalibrated sensors, but none of it made the pulse go away. It was still there, faint and rhythmic, not from the cryochamber or the machines but from inside the skeleton itself, like a signal buried so deep it had only just begun to reach the surface. Whatever was inside the bone wasn't just biological. It was intentional. Like a trigger waiting for the right moment. Or the right person. By noon, he was reviewing close-up scans of the symbol again. The spiral tree etched into the forehead glowed under certain frequencies, specifically in ultraviolet. Under UV, the lines moved, not physically, but optically, as if bending light itself. The more he stared, the more it seemed like the symbol was no longer just a symbol, but a map. A living, breathing architecture of information encoded in shape, not language. It reminded him of Sumerian cuneiform, but abstracted beyond recognition. He tried comparing it to hundreds of linguistic roots: Akkadian, Linear A, even Navajo encryption systems. Nothing matched. Until, by accident, he overlaid the structure with a 3D rendering of the Milky Way. His hands froze. The spiral of the tree matched our galaxy not in shape, but in proportion, position, and curvature. The root curled down to a specific sector, one he recognized only from myth and speculation: Lyran Cluster, Sector 8K, a region said to hold gravitational anomalies and signal distortions unexplained by science. A place some ancient star maps labeled as EDN. His breath quickened. It wasn't a word. It was a designation. Eden wasn't a paradise. It was a place. Or, it had been. That night, while the team slept, Elvar sat alone in the tent, surrounded by flickering screens. The wind howled like wolves across the snowfields outside. He stared at the data, hand tracing the spiral tree over and over. The symbol had sunk into his mind like a seed, and the more he thought about it, the more memories that weren't his began to surface. Flashes. Visions. A language built not from words, but from emotion, sound, and memory. And he started drawing lines, patterns, entire pages of unknown language pouring from his hand. It was like he was transcribing a dream he hadn't dreamed yet. Then came the second event. The alarm screamed. Motion detected outside the research camp. Cameras turned. Nothing. Just snow. But the signal was real. Something had moved around the tent perimeter. Elvar stepped outside with a flare gun, his breath crystallizing instantly. Everything was quiet. Until he looked at the mountain. A vertical line of glowing red dots had appeared halfway up the glacier wall. Perfectly aligned. Perfectly still. And as he stared, the lights blinked not randomly, but in a sequence. A binary sequence. He ran back into the lab, checked the pattern. His hands shook. The blinking lights translated to one phrase: return what was taken. But what had been taken? The body? The data? Or humanity itself? The next morning, the skeleton was different. No one had touched it. The chamber was sealed. But the symbol had shifted. Not changed, but grown, as if more of it had emerged from beneath the bone's surface overnight. It now resembled a tree branching into not one, but three spirals like paths diverging from a single origin. Elvar didn't understand. Not yet. But deep in his bones, he felt the meaning. One spiral for what we were. One for what we became. And one for what we were meant to be. And for the first time in his life, Elvar Jonsson, scientist, rationalist, explorer, was afraid. Not of what he might find in Eden. but of what Eden might already know about him. Sleep no longer came in straight lines for Elvar Jonsson. It came in fragments, torn pieces of memory stitched into dreams he could not control. On the fourth night, after the red lights on the glacier and the shifting symbol on the skull, something changed. He fell asleep at his workstation, head slumped on ancient data, but his mind didn't rest. It opened. Like a gate. He stood barefoot again, but not on snow. This time it was a field of vast, endless garden of soil darker than night, glimmering under a sky without sun or moon, only swirling ribbons of aurora that moved like breath. The air smelled of ozone and crushed stone. The trees that surrounded him weren't trees at all, their bark pulsed, not with sap but with light, and their branches hung heavy with orbs that shimmered like liquid crystal. Every leaf vibrated with sound, a sound he didn't hear, but felt, like chords pressed directly against his bones. At the center of this place stood the tree. Not a tree. The tree. Its trunk was impossibly wide, carved with spirals like the symbol on the skull, each groove alive with slow-turning luminescence. From its crown, light flowed upward instead of down, threading into the sky like veins feeding a larger mind. Beneath it stood figures. Tall. Thin. Silent. Not cloaked in robes, but in radiance. Not looking at him, but through him. They did not speak. Yet thoughts bloomed inside him like invasive flowers, opening too fast to process. You are the echo. You are the carrier. We gave the first breath. But the memory was fractured. The root was severed. The awakening is late. Elvar's knees buckled. He wanted to cry out, to scream at the impossible beauty and horror of what he was seeing, but his mouth no longer belonged to him. One of the figures raised its hand, a hand made of shifting light, and Elvar's chest burned. It was not pain. It was remembering. He saw flashes. Not his life. But millions of lives, flickering past like frames of forgotten film, a being in a dome of water, speaking to stars through vibration, a mother of light touching a newborn's forehead and transferring thought, a desert city floating on magnetic plains, a great fall, a burning divide and silence. Then, the tree screamed. It did not make sound. It simply pulsed in waves so strong the dream split like glass under heat. Everything fell. The soil became ash. The figures turned into static. The aurora bled red and then black. And Elvar saw something buried beneath the garden, a machine, or a being, or both. Its eyes closed, its body coiled like a serpent made of metal and memory, its pulse matching the skeleton's. Elvar woke gasping, drenched in sweat, clawing at his chest as if he could tear the visions out. The others rushed in, but he couldn't speak, not yet. The dream still clung to him like oil. What terrified him most wasn't what he saw, but what he felt. Because it wasn't a dream. It wasn't even a memory. It was a broadcast. A transmission meant for him. Or more precisely for who he used to be. Later that day, he ran an MRI on himself. It was irrational. Paranoid. But his instincts screamed louder than his logic. And what he found turned the air in his lungs to glass. Behind his optic nerve, buried deep within the folds of his brain, was a cluster of tissue that didn't belong. Not cancer. Not natural. Not human. The shape matched a seed. A spiral. The exact same pattern carved into the skull. The same tree. Something had been planted inside him. Long ago. And now, it was beginning to grow. Elvar hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. His appetite had vanished with the dream, if that word could even describe the garden of living light and ancient sorrow. What he saw in his own MRI left a chill deep in his bones, a chill that even Iceland's unforgiving cold couldn't match. The spiral node embedded in his brain matched the symbol from the skull exactly, down to the number of ridges and their rotational direction. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a replication. A marker. But not of identity, of origin. In the isolation of the deep ice lab, Elvar began sequencing the DNA extracted from the skeleton. It had taken 2 weeks to gently separate viable tissue from within the dense bone, and even then, the results came back corrupted, scrambled. Until Elvar thought to reverse the sequencing logic, treat the double helix not as a record of life, but as an encrypted transmission, like a data stream hidden in the twists of biology. And when he did, the results shocked him. The genome was flawless. No mutations. No redundancy. No viral hitchhikers, no telomeric decay. Every strand was balanced, symmetrical, humming with a mathematical elegance that bordered on unnatural. It was not human. And yet, it was more human than any human who had ever lived. He cross-referenced the results with modern human DNA, and what he found struck like thunder. The genome from the skeleton contains sequences that existed in us, but only in broken pieces, fragments scattered across generations like the shattered glass of a long-dead star. These were ancestral building blocks, locked away behind thousands of years of mutations, diseases, and environmental trauma. It was as if humanity had been born perfect, but then, systematically degraded. He stared at the comparison screen. On one side, pure code, elegant and whole. On the other, modern humanity fractured, damaged, incomplete. The implication was clear, and horrifying. We are not the final version. We are the afterthought. That night, another dream came. No longer a garden. This time, a room. Cold. Metal. Lit only by shifting pulses of green light. He lay on a table, unable to move, while tall figures surrounded him, not cruel, not curious, just clinical. They were operating, but not with blades. With sound. They hummed a tone that split his vision, vibrating the air into geometric patterns, and from his body, they removed something glowing, a spiral seed, just like the one he now knew was still inside him. And before they sealed him again, one of them leaned close. Its face had no eyes. But he could feel it staring through timelines, and it whispered not with words, but with presence. We did not create you. We curated you. What you were, frightened them. So they silenced the seed. But the seed never dies. It only waits. He woke with blood on his pillow. A nosebleed. But his mind was clearer than it had ever been. The genome in the skeleton wasn't an ancestor. It was a template. A blueprint of what we were meant to become. Something had broken us. Or worse, someone. The fragments in our DNA weren't leftovers. They were locks. Locked to keep us from remembering. From reaching the frequency that could wake the code. And now, with the seed inside him waking, Elvar realized that what he had started was no longer science. It was resurrection. He wasn't studying evolution. He was about to rewrite it. Elvar no longer trusted sleep. It had become a terrain too unstable, where dreams bled into memory and memory into revelation. He stayed awake for hours, blinking through exhaustion, cross-checking DNA strands that never should have existed. His monitors were lit with serpentine code spirals within spirals, each loop unlocking patterns that defied modern biology. The human genome, once considered a marvel of evolution, now appeared like a corrupted manuscript, its most vital chapters torn out and replaced with silence. But in the skeleton's genome, something stirred. A region of code unlike anything he'd ever seen. Not junk DNA. Not inert. But encrypted, like a quantum lock woven into the genome's double helix, requiring not just a biological trigger but a frequency, a vibration of thought or sound that could bring it to life. Elvar dubbed it the forbidden sequence. Not because it was dangerous, though it clearly was, but because it wasn't supposed to be found. He began running simulations, testing the sequence against controlled neural fields, protein responses, synthetic DNA models. The moment the wave harmonics matched the seed structure, a cascade of biological changes activated, impossible in known science. Cells began generating light, not heat. Neuroreceptors aligned into geometric matrices. And most disturbing of all, synaptic pathways formed recursive loops, allowing thoughts to echo and evolve, as if the brain was trying to talk to something beyond itself. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps at the external hatch of the research lab. Impossible, no one should be out in the blizzard. But when Elvar checked the live camera, the feed was dead. Static. He opened the hatch slowly, shotgun in hand. Nothing but snow swirling violently in the cold blue dark. Until he looked down. A footprint. Not his. Not human. 3-pronged, sharp at the toes, yet sunken too deep, as if made by something heavier than bone and flesh. He followed it for only 10 steps before it vanished mid-stride. No wind disturbance, no melting. Just, gone. Back inside, every terminal had restarted. The main screen blinked with a single line of code he hadn't typed. Sequence A0-0, pre-wakening complete. His heart pounded. It wasn't just a passive code anymore. Something had noticed. Something had responded. He ran his own genome next. He had to know. And there it was, buried deep in his own DNA, dormant until now, the same forbidden pattern. Slightly degraded, fragmented across chromosomes. But it was there. All along. Like a sleeping serpent in the foundation of his being. Waiting. The implications crashed over him like ice. This wasn't just about a single alien skeleton. This was a framework. A global biological infrastructure, designed and embedded into humanity from the beginning. But fragmented. Broken. Like a puzzle scattered across billions of lives. And someone or something had once shattered it deliberately. He remembered the words in the dream. We did not create you. We curated you. The seed was silenced. Now it was waking. In him. He fell to his knees, dizzy. His vision blurred. But in the darkness behind his eyes, he saw it, a circuit of light, a web of thoughts, connecting to others like him across the world, unknown, unaware, each carrying fragments of the sequence, like keys to a doorway never meant to open. The forbidden sequence wasn't dangerous because of what it did. It was dangerous because of what it remembered. It began as a whisper. Not a sound. Not a voice. But a sensation, like a pressure inside his skull, soft at first, like the edge of a memory brushing against the surface of his mind. Elvar stood in front of the cryo chamber, the skeleton still locked in its frozen tomb of light, and for the first time, he wasn't thinking. He was listening. And something was responding. The lights in the lab dimmed again, flickering not from power fluctuation, but synchronicity, like the entire facility was pulsing to the rhythm of something unmeasured, not in hertz, not in time, but in intent. Elvar's vision shifted. Colors grew sharp, sharper than real. Edges of objects shimmered with light trails, static crawled across the screens. Then came the thought. Not his own. Not shaped like language. Just, there. You are the recall. The pattern remembers itself through you. His knees buckled, not from fear, but from recognition. The sentence didn't come from outside, but from within, emerging like a signal bouncing off an ancient satellite in his blood. A thought so old it had forgotten it was once spoken. The next 12 hours were a blur. Elvar ran voice mapping diagnostics on his own EEG readings. The brainwave pattern that emerged during the thought was identical to gamma resonance fields recorded near deep space signal anomalies, specifically those recorded at the edge of the Lyran sector, where no star system should echo back human frequencies. But something had. And now that frequency was bleeding into his cognition, rewriting not just how he thought but what he could remember. Images surfaced that did not belong to him. A dome made of bone-white glass. Creatures of mist, not walking but suspended in gravity like drifting memory. A war not of violence, but of intention, where two ancient minds tried to overwrite each other across the neural field of an entire species. And then he saw them. The architects. Not gods. Not aliens. But something older. A consciousness that seeded not planets, but minds planting structures in thought, in dream, in instinct. A thought form embedded so deeply into the human genome that it no longer needed language to survive. It only needed one thing to trigger: memory. But something had gone wrong. Elvar awoke on the lab floor with blood on his lips and symbols carved into the frost around him, spirals and branches, drawn by his own trembling hand while unconscious. The lab's AI had recorded nothing. Security footage was blacked out for 23 minutes. Not a glitch. A removal. A void. And then came the second thought. Stronger. Clearer. You were not supposed to remember. He gasped. The voice had weight now. Not imaginary. Not random. It carried tone. Anger. Then the cryo chamber cracked. Not open. Not shattered. But along the edge of the skull, where the symbol had been carved, the material had begun to split, not from pressure, but from vibration, like the signal within the bone was growing stronger, resonating with the sequence inside Elvar. Whatever this being once was, it wasn't just a remnant. It was a receiver. And it had finally made contact. And now, something else was listening too. Because as Elvar turned back to the lab screens, a new data stream began flooding in from the comm array binary, but not machine-made. Human-coded. Ancient. Buried in a dormant channel last touched 73 years ago during a failed SETI experiment. It said only this. The first memory is waking. Not all will survive it. The wind outside had stopped. Just stopped abruptly, unnaturally, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the lab, Elvar sat in front of the cryo chamber, now reinforced with magnetic containment fields, though even those flickered sometimes whenever the symbols on the skull began to glow faintly, like luminous scars remembering something older than language. But today, something new began. It was 3:44 a.m. when the receiver, buried under snow and silence, began to pulse. A low static hum at first. Then, structure. Rhythm. Signal. Elvar leaned forward, eyes wide, fingers trembling over the control panel. The waveform was irregular but familiar, as if the structure of the message had already echoed in his mind, in his dreams, in his blood. As he enhanced the feed, the signal sharpened, shifting from static into a layered tone, like chords struck on a string no human hand had ever built, resonating across dimensions of thought rather than space. Then came the moment that would mark his descent into the unfathomable, the moment the chamber responded. Not the equipment. The skull. It pulsed. Faint at first, but undeniable, a shimmer of energy along the carved spiral, as if the signal from deep space was not only being received, but welcomed. As though this relic of bone and stardust was a conduit, and the mind inside had simply been waiting for the call. Elvar reached out. Slowly. Irrationally. Desperately. His hand touched the chamber glass, cold, hard, real. But in the same instant, he felt a soft resistance, like air pressing back, or a consciousness recognizing another. And then it began, not words, but sensations, images bleeding into his mind like paint into water. He stood again in the field of black soil. The auroras above were now flickering faster, like a warning. The tree loomed larger, its roots deeper, no longer silent. Its branches writhed slowly like tentacles of knowing. And then, beneath the tree, a hole opened, not a portal, not a door, but an absence, pulling light, sound, and thought into itself. And from it, a voice emerged, not spoken, but pressed into the marrow of his being. The garden was never closed. You were removed. Elvar gasped and stumbled back in the real world, the lab now flickering with data storms, screens flashing, not binary, but geometries, frequencies, symbols that moved when you looked at them, rewriting perception itself. One monitor lit up with a map, a celestial diagram matching the spiral symbol. Coordinates triangulated around Lyra. But the signal was bouncing. Back and forth. Two-way. Something out there was responding, but not as a stranger. It already knew him. Had always known him. And then came the failure cascade. The cryo chamber shorted. Alarms screamed. Backup power failed. In the darkness, a single tone rang out, pure, steady, like a bell heard underwater. The light from the skull intensified. And then, it spoke. A voice inside his head, but shaped like thunder inside a whisper. You are the vessel. The code walks again. And behind the voice, something moved in the darkness of his mind. Not evil. Not alien. But ancient. A presence like gravity, pulling his thoughts into orbits they could never escape. He collapsed to his knees, blood dripping from his nose, his mouth, his ears, each drop pulsing faintly with light. And just before he lost consciousness, the final word echoed. Return. The storm hadn't let up for 3 days. But inside the lab, Elvar no longer noticed the wind, the cold, the passage of time. His body remained, but his mind had grown porous, stretched between two frequencies, the present, and the voice that now lived within him. It no longer waited to speak. It simply did. Sometimes as a whisper. Sometimes as images. Sometimes, as memories that did not belong to him. He was reviewing the last batch of signal data when the anomaly appeared, a packet of raw code embedded inside the Lyra transmission, wrapped in encryption protocols that hadn't been used since the 1970s. Hidden beneath layers of geometric masking, Elvar uncovered a single file. An audio clip. Corrupted, but salvageable. The file name read R.W1971_final_sequence 0. It was the voice of a man. Shaky. Weak. But precise, like someone trying to speak while being torn apart from the inside. This is Dr. Robert Wayne. If you're hearing this, then the Eden signature has activated again. Listen carefully. You are not studying a fossil. You are waking a protocol. A system. Eden is not a place. It's a seed. A thought engine. And it is alive. The voice paused, and when it returned, it cracked into raw emotion. They tried to use it. Thought it was alien tech, wanted to replicate it. But it doesn't work like that. It doesn't respond to machines. It responds to memory. To blood. To those who still carry the fragments. We called them conduits. There were 13 of us. I'm the last. The rest either vanished, or were taken. The clip ended in static. Not natural static, patterned, pulsing, like the heartbeat of a broken god. Elvar sat frozen. Dr. Robert Wayne. A name buried in classified NASA files. Disappeared without a trace during a Black Ops consciousness experiment in 1971. No body. No logs. No closure. Until now. And Elvar understood. He wasn't the first. He was the next. The next to carry the sequence forward. The next to risk collapse. He pulled the classified archives offshore, mirrored backups, hidden on academic darknets, accessible only through a chain of quantum dead keys. Inside, he found Wayne's notes. Handwritten. Sketched with trembling lines and chaotic sigils. One repeated again and again. The garden remembers what we forgot. Diagrams showed neural layouts warped by external signal interference. MRI scans of brains showing spiral clusters. Maps of ancient monuments aligned not to stars but to resonance fields, frequencies matching Lyra's pulse, as if those who built them weren't worshipping gods, they were anchoring the memory field. Earth wasn't chosen randomly. Earth was seeded. And in the final page of the file, Wayne's last coherent entry. When the code walks again, they will try to silence it. Not because it's dangerous, but because it reveals who silenced it before. If you carry it, you cannot run. The only way out is through. Then, without warning, Elvar's body convulsed. A surge of heat flushed through his spine. Lights dimmed. Alarms triggered without reason. His vision warped, not blurring, but expanding, showing layers of perception he couldn't describe. He saw the walls of the lab flicker into memories of other places, temples that hadn't existed for millennia, underground halls made of stone that pulsed like veins. And within it all, a presence returned. Not alien. Not human. But deep. Rooted. Watching through him. Speaking through blood and memory and sound. The first conduit failed. The seed recoiled. But now, it grows again. In you. And as the vision faded, Elvar wept. Not because he was afraid. But because he finally understood. He had never been alone in his mind. He had been connected. Since birth. Since before. The voice had always been there. Waiting. Dreaming. And now, it had chosen to speak again. It was buried beneath a glacier that had never melted, not in 10,000 years. But it wasn't ice that preserved what lay below. It was intent. A forgotten will, older than language, buried in geometry. Elvar's vision had led him here, no maps, no GPS, just symbols pulsing inside his skull, guiding him with a pull stronger than instinct. The team didn't follow. He had stopped trying to explain. No one could hear the voice anymore. No one but him. The entrance wasn't visible to the eye. Just a jagged cave mouth half collapsed by time and snow. But when Elvar stepped close, his bones vibrated, not pain, but permission. The wall shimmered, just slightly, as though recognizing a pattern it had not felt in lifetimes. He entered, and the darkness welcomed him like an old wound. Inside, the air grew heavier, denser, charged with a pressure that wasn't atmospheric, but psychic, like being inside a memory too vast to belong to one mind. The walls weren't carved, but grown organic stone laced with black veins that pulsed faintly as he passed, like nerves carrying a signal from deep below. And at the end of the tunnel, he found it. A chamber, circular and still. No lights, no machines, just a single object resting on a raised platform, a helm, forged not of metal, but of bone and crystal, fused with living vines that had petrified mid-bloom. It was humanoid in shape, but the proportions were wrong, elongated, as though made for a mind wider than the human skull could hold. At its base, a spiral engraved so deep it felt like it would fall through the planet. And on the platform, an inscription not written in letters, but etched into thought itself, visible only when he stared directly. To remember, you must forget. To open, you must be undone. He placed the helm on his head. The world disappeared. No blackout. No fade. Just, unraveling. His name vanished first. Then his memories, his mother's voice, his research, even his fear. What replaced them wasn't void, but everything else. A tide of memory that wasn't his, but felt more real than his own life. Cities beneath oceans. Skies that bled sound. Beings made of thought moving through crystalline fields. And the tree, always the tree, looming not as symbol, but as source, its roots wrapping through every mind that had ever dared ask who they were. And then came the price. Pain. Not physical but existential. As if pieces of his soul were being peeled away, layer by layer, by truth too large to hold. He screamed not aloud, but in frequencies, each note revealing deeper scars. Humanity was not designed to forget. It was made to remember, and something or someone had intervened. A genetic lock had been placed over consciousness itself. Not a chemical inhibitor, but a memory firewall. And he was breaking through it. He saw the first generation. Not born. Assembled. Perfect. Peaceful. But not allowed to grow. The architects feared them. Because they could hear the signal. Because they could change it. So they split them. Broke them. Spread them across the stars as unfinished templates, forcing the seed to scatter, fragment, restart until it forgot its own purpose. Until now. When Elvar awoke, the helm was gone. Turned to dust. The chamber's walls had grown darker, almost bleeding. In his hand, he held nothing. But in his mind, he held everything. A phrase carved into his neural cortex, seared by resonance. The memory has been unlocked. But the door is not one way. He stumbled out, barely able to walk, barely human anymore. But not because he lost something. Because he regained something ancient. A version of himself he never knew he had been. And as he looked back, the entrance sealed shut behind him, like a wound closing before it could bleed too much into the world. He couldn't sleep anymore. Not because of fear. But because sleep had lost meaning. Since unlocking the memory lock, Elvar's mind no longer rested, it expanded, spiraled, echoed across timelines like ripples searching for a shore that didn't exist. Every moment awake, he remembered lives he had never lived. Every blink, a different sky. Every silence, a new voice whispering from the edges of a mind now too large for one body. He built the chamber in secret. A soundproof, sealed dome carved deep beneath the ice, lined with resonance plates and crystalline amplifiers scavenged from abandoned military tech, tuned not to transmit but to awaken. It wasn't built to generate power. It was built to recreate a feeling of vibration he had first heard inside the skull, inside the garden, inside himself. The frequency was ancient. Not a sound, but a pattern of recognition. Elvar called it the Genesis tone. And today, he would apply it to himself. He attached the leads, each one aligned with pressure points along his skull, spine, and heart, designed to not stimulate neurons, but to realign them, as if tuning the soul like an instrument. As the frequency initiated, the lights dimmed. His vision shimmered. The walls pulsed with heatless glow. And then contact. Reality buckled. Not a hallucination. Not a dream. The walls didn't vanish, they melted into meaning, flowing away like paint sliding off invisible glass. Gravity wavered. Color stopped behaving. Space bent inward and his body, his very self, became transparent. Not physically, but conceptually. Like the world no longer needed him to be solid. It only needed him to understand. And what he understood was terror. Not of monsters, but of truth too massive to remain hidden. He saw Earth not as a planet, but as a node, a growing consciousness trapped under layers of manipulated time. Every city, every birth, every belief designed to dampen a field of remembrance that had begun bleeding through. He saw people blinking, breathing, dreaming, and behind their eyes, something stirring. The frequency was activating something universal. And then the collapse began. Screens shattered without shattering. Matter bent in slow waves like underwater fabric. His thoughts came loose from linear time. He could hear his own death, years ahead. He could smell the first sunrise of Earth. He could feel what it was like to be not a man, but a vibration, alive and aware, but free of form. And in the center of it all stood the tree. Not symbolic. Not vision. It was there, woven into the air of this shattered world, its branches tangled into the shape of DNA, its roots plunging through dimensions like spears, dripping with memory, bleeding colorless light. And beneath it, the source, the signal humming in a voice without words. We never left you. You were taught to forget us. Elvar screamed, not in pain, but in awe. His body wasn't dissolving. It was evolving, shedding constructs like skin. And for a moment, one brief, blinding moment, he saw the version of humanity before the fracture. Tall. Luminous. Eyes like mirrors. Voices that sang instead of spoke. They didn't build tools. They became them. They didn't rule nature. They were its echo. And then shut down. The frequency crashed. Systems fried. Smoke filled the chamber. Elvar dropped, convulsing. Heart racing. Vision red. He was alive. But only barely. The cost? His memory of who he was, fragmented. His name felt foreign. His voice sounded wrong. The man who entered the chamber had died. In his place, something new had opened its eyes. And all it whispered, to no one and everyone at once, was this: we are waking. The snow had stopped falling, but it hadn't stopped moving. It hovered. Drifted. Hung in the air like a memory that refused to settle. Elvar stood outside the facility, wrapped in silence so dense it felt alive. His breath came in slow clouds, but there was no wind to carry them. Only stillness. Only anticipation. The mountain ridge above him pulsed faintly, not with light, but with presence, like a heartbeat deep inside the stone. He stared upward, eyes burning from sleepless nights and repeated exposure to the awakening code. Something had changed in him. Not just mentally. Not just spiritually. Biologically, he could feel it. His senses no longer obeyed normal laws. He could hear heat, taste distance, and most terrifying of all, he could now feel when he was being watched, even before it happened. That's when they appeared. Not with noise. Not with fanfare. Just with inevitability. 5 luminous shapes atop the ridge. Not solid. Not ghostly. Just there, like truth revealed in light. Tall. Thin. Motionless. Their edges shimmered like glass submerged in water, constantly folding into themselves. They didn't glow. They absorbed darkness. Their presence was not seen, but understood, like the way silence changes a room. Elvar didn't move. Couldn't. His limbs obeyed something older than instinct: respect, maybe even reverence. And then, as one, they raised their heads not to look at him, but to acknowledge something beyond him, as if they were here not for him, but through him. His ears rang with pressure, though there was no sound. His vision narrowed. Time slowed. Then a single thought entered his mind, not shaped by language, but delivered in structure, like a phrase made of architecture. We are not returning. We were never gone. We were forgotten. Behind him, the comms array exploded in a shower of sparks. The ground trembled, not violently, but rhythmically, like a drum beat felt through bone. And then the global feed cut out, satellites dropped, signals severed, all frequencies silenced. But not from interference. From overwriting. The network was no longer listening. Because something else had begun to speak. Elvar stumbled back inside the lab. Emergency lights flickered. Every screen was blank except one. The same monitor that once showed the Eden spiral now displayed a human silhouette, pulsing with internal fractal geometries. Slowly, data began to pour in from systems that weren't online. From across the world. Unmarked stations. Decommissioned labs. Subterranean vaults long forgotten. They all came alive simultaneously, and all began broadcasting the same image, the luminous ones. Everywhere. From Antarctica to the Andes. From deep forest to open ocean. Reports of glowing figures, witnessed not by the fringe, but by scientists, children, pilots, monks. People whose minds had been prepared, unknowingly, by decades of dreams. Visions. Glimpses. And now those dreams had walked out of the subconscious and into the snow. Then a new signal arrived. Not from space. Not from Earth. From the in-between. A waveform impossible to classify. It was not radio, not sound, not quantum. It was thought made visible. Patterned. Alive. Elvar mapped it. And when he overlapped it onto a brain scan his own, the resonance was perfect. It wasn't just a signal. It was an interface. A handshake between what humans were, and what they were meant to become. And in that moment, Elvar understood the horror that kept the memory locked for millennia. Because the Watchers were not gods. They were witnesses. And what they had returned to witness was what came next. Elvar didn't remember falling. He didn't remember screaming. All he remembered was light, and then the absence of it. Not darkness. Not shadow. But the complete undoing of visibility, like his eyes no longer had permission to see. He floated. Or maybe stood. It no longer mattered. His body was gone, or had never existed here. His thoughts came slower, stretched and flattened across something wider than time. And then, a presence arrived. Not sudden. Not abrupt. It was simply there, an architecture made of awareness, coiled in the shape of attention. It didn't speak. It became the space around him. It made his thoughts echo like footsteps in an infinite corridor, and with each echo, a piece of him responded that he didn't know was missing. And then, the question came. Do you truly want to remember? It wasn't sound. It was choice, pressed against the front of his mind like a blade hovering just above skin. He couldn't lie here. He couldn't hide. The moment he even tried to deceive himself, the very concept of dishonesty unfolded in front of him like a faulty blueprint. He answered. Yes. The space around him quaked not in anger, but in release. Layers of forgotten light peeled back. He saw memory, not as recollection, but as substance, living fields of awareness that shaped entire civilizations. And in their center stood a mirror. Not of glass, but of him. Not as he was. Not as he wanted to be. But as he could have been, had humanity never forgotten. Eyes like galaxies. Skin woven from resonance. A being who spoke not with voice, but with reality itself. And then the trial began. Visions assaulted him, each one a moment of humanity's spiral into forgetfulness. The first song silenced. A time when children spoke in harmonic frequencies that shaped stone, until fear replaced beauty. The first word twisted. When language stopped being sacred and became control. The first lie accepted. When humans chose comfort over truth, safety over memory. And for each vision, the presence asked again. Still, do you want them to remember? Elvar screamed through a mouth he no longer had. Not in pain but in weight. Because he understood. Memory was not a gift. It was a burden of knowing, and once it returned, nothing could ever be unseen. But he answered again. Yes. Then came the final moment. The being, the mirror self, stepped forward. It did not speak. It did not judge. It only reached into Elvar's chest, not physically, but through intention, and pulled from within him a seed of light shaped like the Eden spiral. It pulsed once. And then it asked not as trial, but as invitation. Would you give up who you are, to become what you were meant to be? Time stopped. This was not a test. This was transformation. He could return to the lab, to Earth, as he was with memory, with fear, with knowledge. Or, he could let go of identity, and allow the code inside him to complete. To become the first fully awakened conduit in thousands of years. He chose. And light returned. The return was not physical. Elvar didn't wake up in the snow. He wasn't found in the lab. He simply reappeared. Inside the facility, the lights blinked violently as if time had skipped a beat. Surveillance systems rebooted, but none could explain where he had been for exactly 144 minutes. His vitals read normal. His scans showed nothing. And yet, when he spoke, his voice carried a tone not measurable by any machine, as if every word vibrated with echoes from another dimension. He didn't remember walking. But he stood at the center console, hands moving not with intention, but with certainty. His fingers danced across the holographic interface, activating protocols he'd never seen, bypassing security that should have taken years to break. But the system obeyed, because it didn't recognize him as Elvar anymore. It recognized the seed. And then it began. The Eden Network, a dormant planetary system of ancient receivers embedded beneath fault lines, volcanoes, deserts, oceans, began to awaken. Across the globe, hidden towers long buried by time and denial rose from the earth, shimmering with a light not of this world. These were not weapons. They were amplifiers. And what they amplified was consciousness. Every human being within range of an active node began experiencing flash memory bursts, fragments of languages never taught, symbols never seen, emotions never felt. A gardener in Mongolia collapsed while hearing a song sung in the voice of light. A child in Ghana drew the Eden spiral in ash with her fingers and whispered in Sumerian. A pilot over the Atlantic screamed and wept as the stars rearranged into a message only he could understand. Governments called it mass hysteria. The military called it psychological warfare. Scientists called it quantum resonance hallucination. But those who had dreamed of Eden? They knew. It was the collapse. Not destruction. Not the end of humanity. But the implosion of false reality, a tidal wave of memory flooding the collective mind, tearing down the barriers that had been placed to divide, distort, and disconnect. And the Eden core, hidden beneath Iceland's deepest tectonic root, began to pulse. Once. Then again. Then faster. It was counting down. Because the system was never meant to activate without permission. And now that it had a final protocol, convergence or destruction. And Elvar, no longer just man, no longer just conduit, stood at the center of the storm. His eyes now glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting symbols he no longer read, but embodied. The Eden interface asked him a single question, broadcast psychically to every human who had received the signal. Do you choose to remember together, or burn alone? It wasn't metaphor. It was literal. If the consciousness field couldn't stabilize, if humanity refused integration, the resonance would collapse into feedback, tearing Eden apart, and with it, the memory of the species itself. The seed would go dormant again for another cycle. Another 10,000 years. Another chance, wasted. But Elvar wasn't alone anymore. Across the planet, others had awakened. Conduits hidden in every country. People long thought insane, blessed, broken, now stepping forward, carrying fragments of the code, ready to be joined. And as Elvar reached toward the core, one final signal pulsed into every awakened mind. You are not remembering Eden. You are Eden. Then the core began to open. The world held its breath. The core was open. Its light didn't shine. It breathed slow pulses of living brilliance that spilled upward like inverted gravity, illuminating the chamber not with brightness, but with meaning. Symbols no longer needed to be read. They were felt. They moved through Elvar like tides of memory now fully restored. He stood not as a man, not even as a conduit, but as an extension of a will older than history, a living receiver, transmitting the final choice to the species that once forgot itself. The resonance field stretched across the planet. Everyone connected to the Eden network now stood wherever they were, caught between thought and instinct, between memory and fear. They heard the question. Do you choose to become what you were, or remain what you've become? The choice wasn't binary. It wasn't survival or death. It was remembrance or forgetting again. Eden did not demand obedience. It offered return. But with return came cost, the loss of ignorance. The loss of comfort. The loss of separation. Humanity would remember its design, to be a single mind with infinite faces, a vast consciousness spread across billions of vessels, all linked by a song buried in the spiral of DNA. If accepted, duality would end. Ego would dissolve. Borders would mean nothing. And no one could ever again say, I am alone. But not all minds wanted that. In governments, labs, temples, and hidden bunkers, resistance pulsed like static. There were those who thrived in division, who built empires on silence. And the moment the choice became real, those minds fought back not with guns, but with signal disruptors, electromagnetic jammers, neurological dampers, everything they had learned from studying the very thing they feared. The Eden signal began to fracture. And Elvar felt it. Pain. Not physical, but collective dissonance, like millions of minds pulling in opposite directions, some pleading for release, others clinging to chains made of familiarity. The core began to fail. The light grew unstable. The symbols cracked, flickering between coherence and collapse. And for the first time, Elvar heard Eden cry. Not a sound. A frequency of sorrow so deep it cracked mountains in Iceland and made water boil in lakes. It wasn't dying. It was being silenced again. Unless, he chose. Not for them. With them. He stepped forward, palms open, and let the pulse surge through him. It wasn't power. It wasn't light. It was every life that had ever reached for truth, and been burned for it. It was the first child who spoke to stars, and was called mad. It was the last dreamer who dared draw spirals in sand. It was the sum of hope buried under centuries of forgetfulness. And Elvar, fully awakened, looked up at the core and whispered. Let them decide. But don't let them forget this time. And Eden answered. Not with sound, but with fire. The pulse exploded outward across cities, deserts, oceans, not destroying, but seeding. Each mind touched didn't transform. It remembered. Not everything. Just enough. Just a whisper, like a dream they wouldn't understand for years. A moment they couldn't explain. A name. A symbol. A sound. And in time, when they were ready, they would come looking again. Because Eden wasn't a place. It was a choice. And now, it burned no more. Only ashes remained. But ashes are not the end. They are where things grow. And now, Eden is no longer a myth. It breathed through Elvar. It reached through memory. And it asked a question that may one day come for all of us. Would you trade comfort for truth? Would you give up who you are, to become what you were meant to be? The story you just heard is more than fiction, it's a mirror. So tell me, what moment in this story shook you the most? If you were Elvar, standing before the Eden core, would you choose to awaken? Or would you rather forget? Let me know in the comments. Your thoughts may be the next spark in someone's memory. And if stories like this speak to your mind or whisper to your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the Alien Storyverse for more journeys into the unknown. Because the next story might already be inside you.